Do you know the 14 traits of successful chiropractors? We've interviewed some of the top chiropractors in the industry and have identified the common traits that they all share. Jump on over to www.chirobusinessmojo.com to get your free report today.
Welcome to the Chiro Business Mojo podcast, where we deconstruct the methods, marketing, and mindset of successful business people and chiropractors from around the world. And now your host, Dr. Richard Day.
Hello, I am Dr. Richard Day, and this is the Chiro Business Mojo podcast. Thanks so much for spending some of your valuable time with me. Well, I first became aware of today's guest after interviewing Shane Purnell on the podcast a few episodes back. And if you're a listener of the show, you know that I usually ask the person for at least one book recommendation. And the book that Shane recommended to me was a book called The Go-Giver by Bob Burg. And I hadn't heard of Bob Burg or The Go-Giver, but when I looked a little more into what the book is about and about Bob, I thought, I've got to get this guy on the show. Bob shares information on topics vital to the success of today's business person. He speaks for corporations and associations internationally, including Fortune 500 companies, franchises, and numerous direct sales organizations. He typically addresses audiences ranging in size from 50 to 16,000, sharing the platform with notables including today's top thought leaders, broadcast personalities, Olympic athletes, and political leaders, including a former United States president. Although for years he was best known for his book, Endless Referrals, over the past few years, his business parable, The Go-Giver, which was co-authored with John David Mann, has captured the imagination of his readers. The Go-Giver is a Wall Street Journal and BusinessWeek bestseller. It's sold over 500,000 copies. Since its release, it's consistently stayed in the top 25 on 800 CEO Read's Business Book Bestsellers List. It's been translated into 21 languages, and it's Bob's fourth book to sell over 250,000 copies. Bob is an advocate, supporter, and defender of the free enterprise system, believing that the amount of money that one makes is directly proportional to how many people they serve. Welcome, Mr. Bob Burg.
Richard, thank you. Just so appreciate being with you today.
Well, thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us here today. And I want to talk to you in a nutshell. What is your book, The Go-Giver, about?
It's really about, and it's a business parable, so it's a short story co-authored with John David Mann, who's just a fantastic storyteller. It's really about shifting your focus and understanding that when you do that, when you shift your focus from getting to giving, and when we say giving in this context, we simply mean constantly and consistently providing value to others. Not only is that a nice way to live life and conduct your practice, it's also a very financially profitable way to conduct your practice as well.
Well, now to me, and I've heard this concept, and maybe you're the one who started it, but I've heard of this concept of really providing that value up front. And then, on the back end is when things from a business owner's perspective, financially you start to see your returns. And this is so counterintuitive to really, I think, the way things have been before. How does giving more build success?
Well, it doesn't have to be a long-term type. It's not as though you have to give for a long time before you receive. That's not necessarily it at all. But what happens is it's the whole mindset shift that you're focusing on that other person. For example, no one is going to be your patient because you need the money, or because you have a quota to meet, or because you have office expenses, or because you're a really nice person who really believes in chiropractic care. They're going to do business with you. They're going to be your patient because they believe it's more advantageous for them to do so than to not do so. And I say that only because it brings back the fact that we must focus on providing or bringing value to others, as opposed to focusing on the money itself. Again, that doesn't mean it needs to take a long time before it happens. How do you give value on the front end? Well, it might be when you first meet someone, whether it's at a Chamber of Commerce business card exchange or a charity event or your kid's ball game. It just means that when you exchange names with each other and ask each other what the other one does, you focus on them and their business rather than on your practice. It means you ask them how they got started in their business, what they enjoy most about it. You might say, you might let them know I always love connecting good people with other good people. How can I know if someone I'm speaking with is a good client for you? If they're in sales, or it might be, how can I know if someone I'm speaking with would be a good connection for you? In other words, what you're doing is right from the get-go or from the give-go, you are communicating to them that your goal is to help them, is to make their life better, their life easier, their life more profitable, what have you. Now, in the context of chiropractic care, well, everything you do is about giving value. Your law number one is the law of value. And that simply says that your true worth in the business sense, your true worth is determined by how much more you give in value than you take in payment. Well, what does that really mean? Because, Richard, that sounds very counterproductive when you first hear it. How do you give more in value than you take in payment and not go out of business, right? I mean, that sounds, so we have to simply understand the difference between price and value. Price is a dollar figure. It's a dollar amount. It's finite. It is what it is. Value, on the other hand, is the relative worth or desirability of a thing, of something, to the end user or beholder. In other words, what is it about this thing, this product, service, concept, idea, that brings so much worth or value to another person that they will willingly, which is the hallmark of a free market-based system, they will willingly exchange their money for this value that you're providing. For example, when I go to my chiropractor, I'm often going, now while I should go more for maintenance, I tend to go when something happens, right? I mean, we all know a lot of people do that. Mm-hmm. And so, when I go, it's because I'm having some discomfort, right? And the money I'm paying him pales by comparison to what he does for me. He's giving me much more in value than what he takes in payment, and he is still making a very healthy profit. But the reason I go to him rather than someone else is because I know he's concerned about me. I know his focus is on me, not the money. This is why we say that, and this is, I think, is really what it comes down to. Money is simply an echo of value. It's the thunder, if you will, to value's lightning, which means nothing more than the value must come first. That must be the focus. The value comes first, and the money you receive is simply a very natural and direct result of the value you provide. Please understand, I'm not saying the money's not important. The money is important. It's just not where your focus should be.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, because as I'm listening to you speak, I'm considering the mindset of the customer, or in this case, the patient. And, mm-hmm. someone, if they do not perceive a value in what you're doing, mm-hmm. they are not going to have good feelings about,
right.
They may think they've paid too much. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you've really over-delivered, like you said, they're willingly and gladly giving you the money.
Exactly.
But the dollar value is the same amount. It's really about establishing a mindset in that end user or patient.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Well, explain your belief that the journey towards the goal is more important than achieving the goal.
Well, they're both important, but the journey is sort of the focus. This is where it begins. In fact, it's what you can control, because remember, we can't always control the outcome, right? We can control the actions we take. Again, it always goes back to where the focus is. It's where in the story where Joe says to Pindar, the main mentor, he says, are you saying asking if something will make money is a bad question? And Pindar says, no, asking if something will make money is a great question. It's just a bad first question. First ask, will it serve? Does it serve? If the answer is yes, then ask, does it make money? Well, it's the same thing with the, in terms of hitting a goal. The process is the important part. Do the process, do the work, do it correctly, and the result's probably going to happen.
Well, that is exactly something that I've observed as well. And you said, now, let me play devil's advocate here.
Sure.
So the journey, you said, is something that we can control. What do you think about things that happen outside of our control?
Well, those things we can't. We can only control the action we take. on our part of the journey. We can't often control what happens to us. There's so many things that happen in life. And for someone to say, oh, you're responsible for that hurricane. Well, no, that's obviously not. Now you might be responsible if you didn't put up the shutters.
Right.
but no, the hurricane's the hurricane. So no, there's certain things we can, the day I realized I was not general manager of the universe was the day that things started to go a little better for me.
Boy, I remember that day as well for me.
Right, exactly.
Well, let's talk influence. It gets mentioned a lot in your book.
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, the law of influence says that your influence is determined by how abundantly you place other people's interests first. In this case, it would be your patients or your potential prospective patients. Let's look first, though, at what influence is. I think on a basic level, a very, very basic level, we can define influence as simply the ability to move a person or persons to a desired action. Usually within the context of a specific goal. Now, again, I believe that's a good definition. I don't believe, Richard, that is the essence of influence. In my opinion, the essence of influence is pull as opposed to push. You never hear people say, wow, that Patty or that David, he's so influential. He has a lot of push with people. He's just so pushy. Oh, no, he has a lot of pull, or she has a lot of pull with people, because that's what influence is. It's pull. It's an attraction. Great influencers attract people first to them and then to their ideas. And they do this not through pushing themselves or their ideas on others, not through being push-y, but through its opposite, pull. It's the difference between compliance, which is, manipulation, intimidation, and so forth. The difference between that and earning commitment of others. I think that most great influencers, either intuitively or they've learned that what Dale Carnegie said in his classic How to Win Friends and Influence People, written back in 1937, was so right on the mark, where Dale wrote, ultimately, people do things for their reasons, not our reasons. So the great influencer constantly self-questions to check their motive. They ask themselves, does what I'm asking this person to do, how does it align with their goals, their wants, their needs, their desires? How does what I want this other person to do align with their values? And when asking ourselves these questions thoughtfully, intelligently, genuinely, authentically, not as a way to manipulate another human being into doing our will, but as a way to help this other person in the process, now we've come a lot closer to earning their commitment. And this goes back to how we look at law number 3, the law of influence. Your influence is determined by how abundantly you place other people's interests first. And if you look at the great salespeople, the great leaders, the great producers, this is simply how they run their lives and conduct their business. Their focus is always 100% on bringing value to others. Now, let me clarify something and qualify it if I may. When we say place the other person's interests first, we certainly don't mean you should be anyone's doormat or a martyr or self-sacrificial in any way. Absolutely not at all. It's just that, as Joe, the protege, learned in the story, all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people, certainly those chiropractic physicians who they know, like, and trust. And there's no faster, more powerful, or more effective way to elicit those feelings toward you from others than by truly placing their interests before yours. Or what one of the mentors in the story, Sam, explained to Joe, it's about making your win about the other person's win. And when you do that, you become attractive to them.
That is great advice. It's almost, I would have to say, comparable to speaking another language, in that you have to stop and think about it first, because I think most of us are either raised or just innately, we're self-centered first. When you first go to meet somebody,
Sure.
I'm more concerned that I'm saying my name correctly, and I walk away 30 seconds later and I can't remember their name.
Right.
But I think, if you can get it to where it's natural and you are truly concerned about that other person's, needs or well-being, and get that out there first, what a difference maker that is.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, let's talk about trust. That's a theme that's in the book, and I think most people would agree it's important. But what really is trust?
Trust can be defined, and it often is defined, as the assured reliance on the character, ability, strength, or truth of someone or something. Again, that's a definition, and the definition, I think, works. Is it the essence? I don't know. In his wonderful book, Leaders Eat Last, Simon Sinek gave what I think is the best definition of trust I've ever read. And that is that trust, he wrote, is a biological reaction to the belief that someone has our well-being at heart. And so how do you develop that? How do you develop it? Well, you develop it by being that kind of person, by genuinely and authentically caring about other people. But it's interesting because how do we communicate that trust? And we often say that what you have to give, you offer least of all through what you say. Now, don't get me wrong. What you say is important. The way we speak to others with courtesy, with tact, with kindness. That's very, very important what you say. But it's probably the least important when it comes to communicating trust. More important than what you say, of course, is what you do, right? We've all heard so many sayings along that line. But even more important than what we say and what we do is who we are. And I think that is where character comes into play. Character comes from an old Greek word meaning scrape or scratch. It came to mean an engraved marking and eventually a defining quality. If we were to wax poetic, we could say that character is what happens when life etches or scratches itself onto your soul. But I'm not particularly poetic, so I just like the person's quality. I guess the sum total of all one's qualities is their defining quality. And that's character. That's their character. And with someone of high character, we tend to be very comfortable with them. Whether or not we always agree with them isn't the issue. But we tend to be comfortable. We tend to trust them because we know that they stand for something, and we tend to know exactly what they stand for. Now, that doesn't mean a person of high character doesn't make mistakes. Of course they do. They're human. It doesn't mean they don't course correct. Absolutely they do. And it doesn't mean that they're not flexible when it comes to strategy. Sure they are. But when it comes to those value-based decisions, they are absolutely immutable, unchangeable, and immovable. And that's one reason why we trust them.
A word that I hear a lot these days is authenticity. And would you agree that that could be applied to character? That if you are trying to pretend to be something you are not, people are going to realize that you are not being authentic, and that's going to speak as loudly?
Oh, sure. And what was the old Hollywood saying that we've all heard? Nothing's more important than authenticity, and if you can fake that, you've got it made. Well, it's pretty hard to do that for too long. Now, don't get me wrong. Some people are really good at that.
Yeah, I may have met a few.
Right, I think I have too. But by and large, most of us are not. and it just pays dividends to be ourselves and to come across as the way we truly are. Now, in the story, the law of authenticity says the most valuable gift you have to offer is yourself. And in the story, Deborah Davenport, one of the mentors, shared something she learned early in her career, and that is all the skills in the world, the sales skills, technical skills, people skills, as important as they are, And they certainly are all very important indeed. They're also all for naught if you don't come across as your true authentic self. And I think it's not just a matter of being a good person. It's also good for business to show up as yourself. And I think most of us intuitively do know that. And it brings up the question, why then do some people not show up authentically? And let's put aside the con artist out there, which is, a very small percentage of the population. I think most people, when they don't show up authentically, Richard, it is because they don't have the self-confidence to do so. They don't have the true heart understanding of their worth, of their value. I think as human beings, we all have two types of value. One is what I call intrinsic value. This is simply the value we bring to the table just by being here, by being alive, okay, as being a human being. But we also have another type of value, and I call this market value. And it doesn't just pertain to business, though that's certainly part of it. I define market value as that combination of strengths, traits, talents, and characteristics that allows you to add value to the world, in this case perhaps your patients, in such a way that you will be rewarded for it, often financially. And the challenge is, as human beings, we are so emotionally close to ourselves that sometimes it's hard to really recognize that value that we bring, that market value, because we have worked hard to perfect certain skills, or we've always had a certain skill or a way of being or doing something. And as human beings, we tend to, through our belief systems, or what I call our unconscious operating system, we tend to not only see the world in a certain way, but we tend to believe that others see the world in that same way. So if we have a certain skill, let's say a highly developed sense of empathy for others, or the ability to listen, or we just have great chiropractic skills, we tend to believe that, well, so does everybody, or, the other people who are supposed to have them. And we don't realize that what we bring to the table is something special. And that's why it's so helpful often to consult or, coach with someone or mentor with someone or what have you, in order to get that person's viewpoint who cares about you, but they're not so tied up in you that they can't see you clearly, because sometimes it's easier for someone else to see what you really have, the strengths you have, than it is for us to see our own strengths. I know I fall victim to that, and so does most other people.
Well, you brought up empathy, so we hear that term a lot. But how do you see empathy, and why is it really that important in terms of influence?
Well, certainly to a chiropractic physician, is there anything more important? And that goes along with the actual skills of knowing your craft, because let's face it, someone comes in to your practice, and if they have never had experience with a chiropractic physician, they don't know what to expect. In fact, let's assume they've heard the worst, right? Because that's what we have to expect when we, and so what are they going through? How do they feel? What fears do they have? See, empathy, again, can be defined as the identification with or vicarious experiencing of another person's feelings. And that's fine to say, but we don't necessarily know how they feel. We just feel everybody should love chiropractic. We know how great it is, right?
Right.
I mean, I'm speaking from the viewpoint of a patient who's gone to chiropractors for 40 years. All right. And chiropractors are listening to this saying, chiropractic students are saying, yes. I mean, that, students, that's why I'm getting into this. I know we can heal people naturally without medication and help these people feel so good and healthy and energetic. And so, right. But this patient doesn't necessarily know that. So you've got to be empathetic. You've got to try to put yourself in their shoes and assure them and ask them the right questions and help them feel and know that you do, even if you can't understand exactly how they're feeling, that you understand they have feelings of concern and that you're right there with them.
Yeah, great point. As you're speaking, I'm listening to the things you're saying and I'm picturing myself as a patient in a patient's shoes. And then I started just, for some reason, I'm going to pick on the government here for a minute. I pictured myself, in line going into a practice and having some needs. Let's say it's some pain that has to be, dealt with in some way. And then maybe let's talk about going to the motor vehicle department. And your need there is that you need to get some new license plate tags. The difference in how, my staff approaches that person in pain or in need coming into my office versus, how I feel like I'm treated. When you go to, clearly I don't see there's a whole lot of empathy from that clerk who's on the other side of the counter at the motor vehicle department.
And that's typical of bureaucracy. It's one size fits all by the very nature of the thing. And as human beings, we're all individuals. So one size doesn't necessarily fit all. We all seek happiness as human beings. We all understand happiness individually in our own ways. And we all have decisions that we make, choices that we have to make. This is human. This is individual. We expect that in the marketplace. We don't expect that when we deal with government because we know that there is no incentive for that bureaucrat right? And so empathy is something that you're much more likely to see in the free market than you are, when dealing with a bureaucracy.
Well, let's talk about something. There's an old saying, never let them see you sweat, but you recommend just the opposite.
Yeah, well, everything, there's a time and place for everything, of course, but all things being equal, one of my favorite phrases, I would say, no, let them see you sweat when it's appropriate. And here's what I mean. And I tell the story of my fourth grade teacher, Ms. Cadlick. She was a lovely human being. And the first day she walked into class, she looked at us. We were all looking at her, this, beautiful woman, this angelic looking woman. As you can tell, she was one of my all-time favorites. And she looked at the class and she said, boys and girls, I am 22 years old. I just graduated from college. You're my very first class and I'm scared to death right now. Well, you could have heard a pin drop because to us, she's a much older person, an authority figure, and she is actually sharing her heart with us, letting us know that she's scared. And that all of us in class were going to do our best to make sure that she didn't have to be scared. We were on her side right away. And she had us from that first day or from that first moment. And what we try to do sometimes is try to communicate perfection as though we know all the answers. And we don't. And people know we don't. Now, again, don't get me wrong. There's a time and place for everything. We need to know what we're doing. Okay.
Right.
And, if we're about to, perform something on a patient, I wouldn't say, I am scared to death to do this right now. You may be you think you're in pain now.
Right.
No, that would not be the time and place.
Right.
But in the appropriate time and place, no, you let people know you don't know all the answers. And we can say, let them see you sweat, or we can say, we can put it another way. But let's be human. Let's be authentic. Let's not try to be something that we're not.
Yeah, I like that advice. Especially, I think as a chiropractor, we need to get out in our communities and talk to people, and we often do. But there's a first time for that. And I think, definitely if we're getting to address a crowd, at a public speaking event, or even a community speaking event, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, this is my first time. I'm a little nervous.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I would like to shift now, and let's just talk about the big picture in success, in terms of success. And you've obviously had a lot of success in your career, but most of us have had some failures too. And I would say that we probably learn more from those failures than from the successes. So can you share with us a failure or a challenge you've had in your life and how you have overcome that?
Oh, well, plenty. And I mean, I've had many more failures than I have successes. And I think anyone on their way to, some sort of success has had more failures than successes. I mean, I think that's life. So I don't think there's anything about that that's surprising to anyone. I'll just come up with one, situation. It was the late 90s and things were going pretty darn good. I had a really good business. I had some, especially one client that was just, it was very, very lucrative. I was getting very comfortable, not maybe, but too comfortable. And, it was just, if you'll recall, in the late 90s, that time where online was becoming a thing. Okay. Business was more and more of it was being done online. Now, I am not a technical person. I've got 10 left thumbs, so I don't try to build anything. And when it comes to technology, I am that technophobe. And so people were saying, Burg, you've got to start switching over. You've got to start using technology. You've got to start embracing technology. And I didn't want it to change. Now, in the personal development field, which we're both in really, and we all hear certain things and certain sayings. And one saying that we often hear, let's put it this way. There are certain things within the personal development field that I call personal development political correctness. And that is that we try to make everything seem like we're just embracing it no matter what, okay? Change is great. Embrace change. Feel great about change. But you know something, Richard? I hate change. I like things the way they are. I am not an early adopter. I like things the way they are. And so I didn't want to change. And I kind of felt I didn't have to change. And I didn't change. And you know what? I got left behind. And it set my business back. And it would turn out, we've all heard, we've all learned, don't put all your eggs in one basket with a client who's so big that if they go, then that was also the time where there was a big economic upturn and the whole thing. And I lost this client. And I was now in a position where after a couple of years, I needed to rebuild my business. And so I did involve myself with technology. I brought on someone who could help me with that, and we worked at it and so forth and so on. And now, I'm all over social media and utilize I'm still not a technology person. I have a brilliant business partner, Kathy Tajanel. Unfortunately, she loves technology. She's an expert at it. But so, she has that strength and that's great. But I learned a big lesson. It didn't matter that I, Bob Burg, didn't like change. And it doesn't matter that I still don't like change. I had to embrace it anyway.
Yeah, that is a big lesson. And I guess you could say really in the last 10 years, change is not only continuing as it will, but it's happening at a rapid.
Oh, absolutely. So that was a tough lesson for me to learn, but it was a good lesson for me to learn. It wasn't good at the time,
right?
But it was a good lesson to learn.
Well, you survived another day to tell about it.
Yes, fortunately.
So in terms of the word success, when you think of that word and what it means, who do you think of and why?
Well, I first think of my dad, and my dad and mom are my two greatest mentors. They just a while ago celebrated their, I think it was 59th or 60th anniversary. I'm not sure, but I was totally blessed to have them and still have them as parents. When I think of my dad, I think of him as such a successful guy. He used to always quote from the sages, and one in particular by the name of Simeon ben Zoma, a Talmudic sage, who asked the question, "Who is rich?" And the answer was that person who rejoices in their lot. In other words, that person who lives in gratitude, who appreciates everything good in their life. And one of the things about my dad that makes me feel he's a guy who grew up very, very poor in the Americana type immigrant tenement slums and, the whole thing and ended up making a pretty good living. And, but just loved by his customers and his employees and so forth. And I think about why he's so successful. And he's a guy who, I often talk about people skills. I wrote a book about people skills, adversaries into allies. And I when I think of people skills, I think of my dad, and I continually to this day try to emulate him. And I have a saying that while I didn't learn this from anything my dad said, this is something that I always saw and observed in him. And what I say is the single greatest people skill is a highly developed and authentic interest in the other person. And I would always notice whenever he met anyone, he was totally focused on them and in genuinely and authentically making them feel good about themselves. And to me, that's why he has always been so loved by people. And to me, there's no more success than being loved by people.
That's great, and that's really the key to, I think, a lot of what you're talking about and that we've had in this discussion here. And I think there's a point, at least for me, where when I first read Dale Carnegie's book,
love that book.
I had to develop that skill to really seek out that interest in other people. But I found that over time, there's a real joy in getting to know other people and their experience in life. And it is authentically not about me. It is authentically about that other person. And it sounds like that's really something that your dad had captured in the way he reaches people.
Yeah, and I think he came about it naturally somehow. I think that was really a gift of his. With me, not so much. That was something I had to work with. I did not have that natural, love of others and interest in others and so forth. So that was something I worked at. But the neat thing about it is, and people say, well, if you have to work at it, isn't that inauthentic? No, not at all. We should never confuse authenticity with not improving ourselves. Right? It's like the person who says, well, I have an anger issue and I yell at people, and if I was to do things differently, that wouldn't be authentic. That's malarkey. That's hogwash. It simply means that person has an authentic problem that they need to authentically work on in order to become a better, authentic, more effective human being.
I'm so glad. Yeah. I'm so glad you said that.
Well,
sorry.
No, it's true. And because, we need to not confuse authenticity with not growing.
Right.
Let's grow into our true authenticity.
Yeah. Being authentic to sort of a flawed self that can become an excuse for not improving.
Exactly. Well said. Exactly.
Well, our time together is unfortunately coming to an end, but before we part ways, I have a few final thoughts. Now, you've mentioned some great books. Aside from those books and your books, are there any others you'd like to mention or put out there?
Oh, there are so many wonderful books. Let me name just a few. There's a book by a man named Harry Brown. This was actually published posthumously based on, two brief manuscripts he wrote in the 1960s, and his wife discovered them, after he passed away. And fortunately, she found an independent publisher, Ken McCarthy, and he, published it as one book called The Secret of Selling Anything. What it's really about is it's about understanding and respecting and honoring human nature. And and how successful selling ties into that. One of the things that I just love most about the book was where he wrote, that in any sales transaction, there are always two profits, the buyer profits and the seller profits. And that's the only way that a transaction should take place. He talks about, when it comes to motivation, people say, well, how do I motivate someone to buy? Well, you don't. You can't motivate them you don't need to motivate them to buy. They're already motivated. Your job is to simply discover what they're motivated by and help them get it. It was just a beautiful book. Simon Sinek's book that I talked about, Leaders Eat Last, is another one. And one that I'm reading right now, you may be familiar with the classic from Robert Cialdini, Influence, Science and Practice, which is a fantastic book. He has a new one out now called Persuasion. And it is absolutely one of the best books I've ever read in my life. I'm enjoying it immensely. And it's all about ethically learning how to create the environment of influence. And it is just it's really a beautiful, wonderful book, and I suggest it highly.
Well, I appreciate those recommendations. We will put those in our show notes, as well as links to your books and the other books mentioned in this podcast. Well, what is the best advice you've ever received?
Well, nearly 40 years ago, when I was first getting into sales. Actually, I'd been in sales for probably a couple of years, and I had learned about sales. I'd learned the skills of sales. I was doing well in sales, but there was a lot of untapped potential, and it was because there was something just not quite there. And I remember coming back to the company where I was working, back to the office, and I was really disgusted because the prospect didn't buy because he didn't get it. He didn't get why he should. And one of the people there, an older gentleman, and of course I say older gentleman, which probably means he's my age now, what I am. But back then he was an older gentleman. And I hadn't really seen him before, and I don't remember seeing him afterwards. I think he was an engineer with the company and he was about to retire, but nice guy. And I think he saw in me sort of like Joe, the protege and the go-giver, someone who had potential, but something was holding him back, holding me back in this case. And he said to me, Burg, can I give you some advice? And fortunately, I've always been open to learning. And I said, yeah, of course, I'd appreciate that. And he said two things. He said, one, he said, when the shooter misses the target, it ain't the target's fault. And what he was saying was it wasn't up to my prospect to get why he should buy. It was up to me to communicate the value of my offering. And you don't do that by talking about your product. You do that by asking questions and discovering their needs, wants, and desires. But what he said next would make a dramatic difference in my life and would cause a great change in my perspective. He said, Burg, he was a last names kind of guy. He said, Burg, if you want to make a lot of money in business, actually he said, if you want to make a lot of money in sales, he said, don't have making money as your target. Your target is serving others. Now, if you hit the target, he said, you'll get a reward, and that reward will be money. But never forget that the money is simply the reward for hitting the target. It's not the target itself. Your target is serving others.
That's great advice for any profession. It's especially applicable to chiropractic and chiropractors, since we are really trying to serve people at the most basic level to help them with their health. Well, what is the best way for people to find you and find out more about you and your books and what you're all about?
Sure. Best thing is to go to thegogiver.com, the go-giver without the hyphen. So it's just thegogiver.com. And when they get to that page, they can scroll down. They can connect with my The Go-Giver podcast if they'd like. They can look at the books and get a chapter to see if they like it first before clicking through. They can also check out our Go-Giver Sales Academy, which is a 2-day live event that we limit to just 10 people. And there's a whole bunch of goodies on there, so I invite them to stop by and hang around.
Well, we will link to all of that in the show notes and more. Mr. Bob Burg, what a treat to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for spending some of your valuable time with us.
Oh, thank you, Richard. My absolute pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Chiro Business Mojo podcast at www.chirobusinessmojo.com.